Begin the current Daf Mesechta Bava Metzia Daf Ayin. Begin 3 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues on this theme of Iska, where specifically this phrase that we spoke about, Agra Upagra, which is regarding the seemingly contradictory liabilities of rent and if something happens, because as we said that if it's rent, then you're a shomer sachar, you're a seicher, and then you shouldn't be liable for einstein if it breaks. And if you're charging for the break, well, then you're treating him as a loiva, and then you shouldn't charge the agra, because then that would be ribis on the halva. That's what the Gemara continues on that theme. So discussing today's daf are ma'is shel yisayimim. Regarding the money of orphans, originally the Gemara tells us mutal alvos and beribis, that you're allowed to lend it on interest. They're not. They're orphans and they're minors, and therefore we're lenient. Then the Gemara ultimately says, no, it really means mutal alvos and karvlas chavarachin mehefsid. Although that it's generally prohibited to invest your money by lending it to someone that you're going to get only profits and no loss. By orphans, regarding that we were lenient. Also, the Gemara discusses what do we do with the money of the orphans, like to make sure that the principal remains and it doesn't get depleted. The halach of iska tzarn barzel, which is this iron sheep type of a business investment where your money is secure and all you're getting is profits, which is prohibited to do to a Jew. But regarding a non-Jew, you're allowed to borrow and lend money with interest to a non-Jew. So begin the current Daf Ayin, begin 3 lines down at the top of the Amud, relating back to the last thing we spoke about. When we spoke about a boat, about agro pagra, regarding if it's possible to charge rent and also hold the person liable if it breaks. So Amar Ravana Mishmul, he says, the money of orphans, mutal alvos and beribis. You're allowed to lend it on interest. Now Tais is bothered. He says, wait a second, what do you do with the borrower? Forget about the lender. So you're right, okay, so they're not violating because they're orphans, so you're allowed to lend them money on interest. So one shot Tais says is that the Gemara understood that the borrower is not liable for leisashich only if the lender is also prohibited. I mean, it takes two to dance. And if the lender is not violating, because for some reason we're being lenient regarding the orphans, so then the borrower also won't be violating. But the Gemara, however, finds this difficult. He says, because they're orphans, we're going to feed them something prohibited? We're going to do for them a ribis? Orphans that are going to consume money that's not theirs, let them go after the one that left them, meaning after the father to the cemetery. Like, what is this? We're not going to give them something prohibited. So Amalei said to him, meaning this is Rav Nachman responding to Rav Anan, who said over a teaching in the name of Shmuel. You're telling me that the Shmuel said that you should lend them money on interest? It says, Emily Ezi Gufa de Uvda. Tell me exactly what was the story that you saw Shmuel obviously doing something like this. How was it that you're testifying in his name? Because it most definitely you didn't hear this explicitly from him. Must have been you saw something that he was doing that you testified. Shmuel obviously held you're allowed to lend the money of orphans on interest. What was the story? Somebody says, I'll tell you what the story was. Ahu Duda. There was this cauldron, this bowl, this large plate. The Bnei Mar Ukva, from the sons of Mar Ukva, meaning because they were orphans. To have a babe Mar Shmuel that was in the household, the master Shmuel held on to it. Tukel v'yoivle. So he used to rent out this cauldron to others, and he would weigh it when he would give it over to them, and then tukel, then shukel, and then tukel v'shukeli. Then he would weigh it and take it back from them. So he would weigh it when he would take it back to see if it's missing some of its copper. Now, shakel agra v'shakel pachsa. So actually what he did was that they would pay him the value of how much it went down because of its depreciation, and they also gave him the money of the rent. This pachsa is when it's missing from the copper. So says Rav Anan, if you think to say that it's prohibited for orphans to lend their things on interest, then you have the following problem. I agra loy pachsa. If there's rent, then that should cover the erosion. They should not have to pay for that. The pachsa loy agra, and if they're paying for the erosion, you shouldn't charge the rent. So the question is basically, why are those people paying the rent? Since they're accepting upon themselves, these renters, the depreciation of the erosion of the copper, that's essentially like a loan, similar to the case we spoke about with the boat, with Agra and Pagra. If you're taking responsibility for these einstein, for the thing breaking, for its erosion, so that's essentially like a loan. You're taking full responsibility to whatever happens to it, because a regular renter doesn't compensate for that. So then that seems to be contradictory. Oh, must be that because they were orphans, even though it was like a loan, as we see that they're paying paksa, agra is not a problem. So that was what Rabbanan was saying, that you see that Mo'is Shal Yisayimim, Shmuel held you could rent with interest. Amalei said to him, no, what are you talking about? Kiha, the case you're describing, Afila b'dekanani, even by orphans that are older, that their beards have filled in, and they're not even called orphans anymore. Nami shagel mevid. You're allowed to do that. Why? Because the orphans were accepting upon themselves the depreciation of the value of the remaining copper, as the Gemara explains, because the kama de mikli nechasha, as long as the copper gets burned, batza demei, its value goes down. So even though the renters pay what's lacking of the weight, as he would weigh it when he would give it and take it, there's still a depreciation in the remaining copper that gets burnt, as a copper cauldron gets burnt on the fire, and any copper that gets burnt, its value gets depreciated. So therefore, they're not like borrowers, they're not like loivim, because loivim takes full responsibility, which means that anything that happens, and here they weren't compensating for the remaining copper, that the weight is still there, and therefore they're more like renters, and that's why he was allowed to charge them the rent, and it's not a raya to the halacha that he was trying to say, that Shmuel held that orphans you could lend them money with interest. But the Gemara does say, no, it doesn't sound like that would include. Generally you wouldn't. A renter would not. No, this that he waited was actually, the Gemara has found that as a problem, because if it's agra, then it shouldn't be paksa. That's no, you rent when you rent something, you're expecting that things are going to happen to it. Like let's say einstein, for example, when you're a seicher, you don't pay for einstein. A lender, a borrower, like we were saying all along, and that's the whole concept behind the iska. When you're taking full responsibility, that's like a loan. You have to give back everything as it is. Renter doesn't give back as it is. This is part of renting, and that's the things happen to it. So that's what I'm saying. If you're charging both agra and paksa, how does that work out? Either one or the other. Obviously, no. Even though it's a paksa type of contract, meaning it's like a loan, but you could charge agra because you're saying. And it says no, it's not true, because even though he was charging them for the paksa, it does not make them into a loiva. Meaning, I don't know if that's what they always did or didn't. This is what Shmuel was doing with the orphans, kalim, but it didn't make them into a loiva. It still was like a schirus. And for the schirus, you can make a new contract as long as it's not full responsibility. Full responsibility turns it into a halva. And since it wasn't, because there's remaining copper that gets burned that they weren't compensating for, the orphans were taking that hit, so therefore it's still considered as a schirus. But what the Gemara does say, that there is a heter. Amar Rabba bar Shila, Amar Rav Chizda, Ramla, some says Amar Rabba bar Yosef, bar Chama, Amar Rav Sheshes, a different heter. You're right, you can't lend it on interest, but Mo'ishal Yisayimim, the money of orphans, Mutal al Voice, and you're allowed to lend their money, Karoiv Lischar. That means to say that the orphans will take a portion of the profits, V'rochik lehefsid, and they won't take any part of any loss. Now, literal ribbis, like we said in the Gemara, no, that you can't do. But what the monies will make a profit, they will split. So although such an operation by dikanani, like we said, like older, when it's not minor orphans, that's forbidden because that's like a total loan. You're not taking any, only the party that's taking it is taking full responsibility. That's like a loan. But it's not ribis mamish. It's what's called avak ribis, and it's only rabbinically prohibited because it's not in a ribis ketutza in the definitive type of a way. So since it's only rabbinic, but orphans, rabbanim, are not geyser, as the Gemara is going to continue to explain. We don't want their money to be depleted to give them to eat pruta after pruta, and then they have no more money. So although generally rabbinically we say this is rabbinic ribis, this is avak ribis. Well, that's the iska. Well, that's what the Gemara is actually going to say right now about what you're describing. The Gemara talks about this exact case. The Gemara says that karav l'schar v'rachik lehefsed. If someone goes ahead and he invests his money, and he says that I'm only getting profits, and I'm not taking any loss. So that's a rush. That's a wicked person. That's what we just described right now. I know, but Rashi doesn't translate like that, right? I know the words karav sounds like close. The reason why I think it's saying close is because you're not definite that it's going to be profits. But if there are profits I'm taking, and rachik means far away, meaning he's not taking any of the loss. So that's Russia. Now, let's say you say that, look, I'll take from the loss, and I won't take, I don't know how that's going to be possible, but could be he's a chassid, like it says. He's only there to help out other people. He's not going to take any of the profits, but I'll take some of the loss. That's a chassid. Now, if it's karv lazeh lazeh, meaning I'm going to take from the profits and from the losses, or rachik mizeh, or I'm not going to take either one. So zimid is kaladim. Again, that's the iska. That's how old people are. That's permitted because that you're not making the other person take full responsibility and you take profits on that. That would be the rabbinic violation of ribis, which is essentially giving money to someone else. What a loan is, he's full responsibility. And then you're getting profits off of that. That is rabbinic ribis. But that's what we say. For orphans, they were makel on the rabbinic ribis. Continue on this theme, like we're concerned about the money of the orphans. Omali Rabbi of Yosef. He says, Hani Zuzi di Yasmi, the money of orphans. Hey Chavdin, what should we do for them? How do we manage the orphans' property? So Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef said to him, what we do is that we establish a court. So the Bezdin manages their accounts, and we give them a stipend, a regular stipend for the meals that they have to eat. So Rabbi said to Rabbi Yosef, but they're eventually going to deplete the fund because it's going to consume the principal. So Malay said to him, okay, but what is the master? What do you do? So Malay, he says, we do differently. But Kinan Gavra, we check out a guy, the Islay Dahava Pricha, that has specifically chunks of like a scrap, like scraps of gold. Meaning that gold is definitely his, and it's not like it was deposited to him by someone else, because people don't generally deposit like these scraps of gold as a deposit. Now, if he has these types of like broken pieces of gold, so it must be that he's wealthy, and there would be what to collect from him if the money of the orphans would be lost. So we just have to make sure that it's his money, and Pricha, David Pricha is definitely his. Now, then we take gold from him as security, and we give the money of the orphans to this guy as which is that the guy's not going to make, the orphans are going to make profits, and they'll split 50-50 profits, but there are not going to be any loss to the orphans. That's what we do for the orphans. Now, avodav mesuyim loy, but if let's say he had a distinct item that like this wealthy guy, that wouldn't be enough of a sign that he's wealthy and it's really his, because maybe it's a deposit, and Vasimari, the master, is going to come, Yav Simon v'shakale, and he's going to give signs, and he's going to take it. So in other words, this guy might be an imposter, might not really be a wealthy guy. He might have the bank really owns it, right, and is just deposited by him. But to know that it's really his would be items that would be definitive, like the Dava Pricha. Now, says the Gemara, Rabashi says, okay, wait a second. This is all well. That you find a guy who has these golden chunks. But what happens if you don't find such a person that has these golden chunks? What are you going to do then? Are you going to just consume the money of the orphans? The Rabashi says, Chazinan, we look for a gavra person, the meshapu nechse. We just want to make sure that his assets are quiet and calm by him. There's no contesting. He's a person who's financially stable and honest, and there's no one that's murmurs on his business. Muhammad is trustworthy. He listens to the biblical judgments. It doesn't have any rabbinic excommunications. And we give him the money of the orphans in front of a court, which they have the power to be mafker the nechasim of this recipient to the orphans, and to stipulate with him that we want this operation to be karv l'schav v'rachil that the orphans will only be making half the profits without any of the loss. That's what we do for the money of the orphans. Now, continue to Beis, where we continue with the next Mishnah, continue this theme of ribis, and as we're talking about this idea of iska, when you're investing your money with someone, it's something that people don't realize, that essentially you're lending money. So anytime you're investing, you have to be careful to know what are the conditions of the quote-unquote loan/investment to make sure there's no ribis. So it says the Mishnah, the next thing that we're discussing, you would think that many people might be doing it in Basel, because many people don't want to take a hit on their money, but they want to make 12%, they want to make 15%. So it says the Mishnah, Yisrael. You're not allowed to accept iron sheep from a Jew. What does iron sheep mean? It means to say that the entire responsibility of the assets, of the funds, is the responsibility on this recipient, on the investor, as we call him. And he evaluates that for a certain amount of money. Now, as long as he doesn't give back the money, they divide the profits of the invested money. Now, Rashi is bothered, although this Mishnah seems to be superfluous, because we already learned in Daf Samachez that you cannot have a storekeeper to get half the profits, because he's accepting on him half the loss, as we described the iska problem, which is that he's doing work for you, which is with a half that's like a milva. For sure, over here, where he's accepting all the responsibility, it's entirely a milva. Of course, you can't do such a type of a iska. So that says Rashi, right, there's no chiddush here in the Reisha of our Mishnah. The chiddush is actually for the next case we're going to discuss, that you could take a tzem basel from the akum. But upon the opening halacha says you cannot do this type of a transaction of tzem basel from a Jew. And they should have, is because it's going to be a problem of interest, because again, such an investment is considered a loan, and the profits are given to the investor are interest, because the investor is taking all responsibility for the losses. But of makabim tzem basel and akum. But a Jew, it's permitted to enter such an arrangement with a non-Jew, because the Mishnah is going to say soon that you're allowed to take and give ribbis to a non-Jew, as the Mishnah says, "V'lov mehen u'malvin oisan b'ribbis." You're allowed to borrow from the non-Jew and lend to the non-Jew with interest. And something applies to the resident convert who is a non-Jew, just accepts upon himself to keep the basic Noahide laws. And the Mishnah concludes with an enigmatic statement, which we can explain in the Gemara on Daf Ayin Aleph, that Malva Yisrael, a Jew is allowed to lend Ma'isiv Shel Akum, the money of a non-Jew, Midas HaAkim, from the consent, consciousness of the non-Jew, but not from the Das of Yisrael, which is a very enigmatic statement, and the Gemara is going to explain what does that mean. But first the Gemara asks, regarding the opening halacha of our Mishnah. The Gemara says, Lamemr, is this to say that regarding the Tzayim Barzel, that the B'shusa de Mekabel Kaimer, that it's in the possession of the recipient, as we'll call him, the investor, which is, where do we see this from the Mishnah? Meaning, when the Mishnah says that it's a problem with this investment, because the money you're going to get back on the investment is considered as ribbis. What's ribbis? Ribbis is because we're considering this as halva to the investor. You're giving money to the investor. Now, that means to say that you gave it, it's totally in the rishus of the leiva, as we said, because he's taking full achrayas. If he's taking full achrayas, and therefore it's a loan, and therefore it's a problem about ribbis, that means to say that the tzorn barzel, the iron sheep, let's say you're giving him sheep, and you're saying, okay, the sheep is worth $100 now. If it goes down the price, something happens, you're going to compensate me. But if we make money on it, we're gonna split the profits. That's the term Basel. I'm covered. I'm totally insured by you. That means to say that the sheep must be in the total possession of the investor. Not the investor, whoever the guy that you're investing with. Well, recipient. Yeah, just a very art scroll type of word. Recipient. But whatever, the guy who's taking it from you. So says that must be, because or else it wouldn't be considered as a halva. Says the Gemara, but Reminu. That seems to be contradictory from a Mishnah Masechtas B'chayris. Why? The Mishnah tells us, someone receives, he's the recipient of the iron sheep from a non-Jew. The non-Jew is giving him his sheep to do work with and make a profit on this investment. The halacha is v'ladais p'turim min b'chayra. The offspring are exempt from b'chayra, meaning like Rashi explains. We don't have to talk about the mother, the animal itself that the non-Jew gave you to do work with. That mother animal is exempt from its halacha of firstborn, which if it gives birth to a firstborn, it's not kaddish as generally an animal of a Jew is kaddish, because that animal belongs to the non-Jew. And the Torah tells us that in Bamidbar Gimel, B'Yisrael, which is only by a Jew and not by a non-Jew. The chiddush that we're saying here is even the offspring, which half the offspring go to the Jew and half the offspring go to the non-Jew. Those that even go to the portion of the Jew, even those animals, they have their firstborn, are not kaddish with kedushas b'chayra. So obviously, we consider the tzayin barzel in the possession of the one who gave it, not the recipient. Because if it was with the achrayus of the recipient, which is the Jew, then why is it pater? Even the mother should be pater. Forget about the offspring. But we're saying even the offspring are pater. So that seems to contradict the halacha of our Mishnah by Tzarm Barzel. It's so much in the possession of the recipient that we consider him as a loan because it's totally his. So on that Abaye it says, Lo kasha. It's not difficult. Why? The Mishnah Masechtas B'chayris is, for example, the Mekabel Aleha, the non-Jew took upon himself, the owner of the sheep, took upon himself Einsa V'Zoyla. That if anything happens to it, if it goes down the price, he accepts the responsibility. So it's not totally like a halva, so therefore that's why it's going to be pater from b'chayr. It's still considered in possession of the non-Jew. On the other, in our Mishnah, is like kabbalah ein tzevazayla. The giver didn't accept any responsibility at all. He's like, I want to get everything back the way it is, with the same price, with the same condition. So that's totally the responsibility of the recipient. That's like a loan, and therefore that's why it would be a problem about ribbis. However, the Gemara doesn't like this answer. Amalei Rava says, wait a second. Ida Kabbalah Mara, if you tell me that the Mishnah in Bechayris is talking about where the master accepted upon himself, the owner, the non-Jew, how are you calling it iron sheep? But it depreciates by him. It's not iron sheep. It's not getting back everything as it was. Moreover, if you would hold that such a case, where even if he accepts upon himself you would still call it in the category of Tzarm Barzel, then I have a question regarding the halacha of our Mishnah. Because Adatani Seifam, instead of the Seifa of our Mishnah teaching, our Mishnah first said, you cannot do Tzarm Basel, and then it said, but of Makabel and Tzarm Basel and Akim, which is a common type of thing that a Mishnah does, a contrast. It says what's forbidden, and then it says what's permitted, but you could do Tzarm Basel with a non-Jew. Says the Gemara, if you're saying it's true, Liflig B'didei, you could have made a differentiation in the Yisrael itself, and found the case that's permitted. You could have said, B'medrim, when we say that it's Aser, it's only where the giver did not accept upon himself any einsin, or if it goes down the price. But if the owner took upon himself einsin or going down, shopper dummy, that would be okay. So why go to a non-Jew? Even in the Jew, you could have a quote unquote Tzarm Basel, if you're calling it Tzarm Basel, even by a Jew. So Elo, my Rabbi gives a different approach. He says no. Both our Mishnah and Mishnah B'chayris is the like Kabbalah Mara. The owner of the animal did not accept upon himself ein tzevazayla. Because again, if he did, there wouldn't be a Tzarm Barzel, not getting back everything as it is. So therefore you're right, it is in the possession of the Makabel. And that's why in our Mishnah, since he's taking full achrayus, and therefore it's considered like a loan, and therefore that's why it's a problem because of ribbis, because the guy's going to be making profit on money that he's definitely getting back. That's loan with interest. So how do we understand the Mishnah B'chayris then? If it's totally in the possession of the recipient, then it should be chayiv and kedushas b'chayra. That's a different reason, says the Gemara. The reason why even the offspring, which is a huge chiddush, which that totally the Jew is part of the 50% profits, and that animal that has a child, that first one is not going to be because b'chayra, is for the following reason. It's because kiv and the because since if the non-Jew is going to come and he's going to want his money back as it was originally evaluated when they made the conditions of the term browse with the Jew, and lo yav zuzi, let's say the Jew's not going to have money, he's not going to give it to him. Asa nachi tafas lo behema. You know what the non-Jew is going to do? He's going to grab the original animal, which was his. Now, and if they don't find the animal, let's say that's not around, tafas lahu levladis. He's going to grab even the offspring that are belonging to the portion of the Jew, because it's like, well, this is all for my animal, and where is it? And he's gonna. So therefore, this is what's called Vavale Yad Nocher Be'emtza. This is where the hand of the non-Jew is in the middle, meaning he has some type of power regarding the offspring, because he's like, yeah, this is you owe me the money. My animal's not here. Well, wait, where the offspring is from, I'm taking your part of the offspring. So therefore, even the offspring are going to be exempt from B'chayra. Because anytime you have that the hand of the non-Jew is in the middle, that he has some type of a claim on it, that already exempts it from B'chayra, and therefore that's why it's going to be pater. Not because it's lacking in any of the achrayas of the makabel, like we see in our Mishnah. No, it's full, but this itself exempts the animal from B'chayra. Now, continue on this theme of our Mishnah that we spoke about, that you're allowed to borrow or lend to a non-Jew with interest. So the Gemara brings a pasuk in Mishli. Marba hainoi. If someone increases his wealth beneshech v'tarbez, with biting and with interest, l'chayne dalim yikpetzeno. For the one who has compassion on the poor is who he's gathering it for. So says the Gemara, my l'chayne dalim. What does that mean if you're getting wealthy from charging people interest, that you're gathering it for the one who has compassion on the poor? Sounds like that's a punishment, because that's what you're doing ribis. So Merabah says, Kikun Shabar Malka. It means like the Persian king, King Shapur, that he would take the Jewish people's money, and he was some type of, his politics were that you take from the wealthy, and then you go and you give it to the poor non-Jews, which the reason why they're called Dalim is because they're Dalim in the mitzvahs, they're poor for mitzvahs. So the Jewish people getting wealthy, fat from other people's money by lending an interest, those are the government just takes away your money and gives it to all these programs for the people that are not Jewish. Now, Amr of Nachman says, Amali Huna, Rav Huna said to me, no, the chiddush of this pasuk is not even that when you're lending on interest to a Jew, it's the afilah ribis the oivik kachavim. This Jew owns a bank, and he's charging ribis to non-Jews. Even a Jew who takes ribis from oivik kachavim, his money is going to be depleted. The government's going to take it all away, and it's going to give it to all these programs. Says Gemara, really? Rav Nachman, they asked when the following pasuk in Devarim. It says, "L'nachri sashich." To a non-Jew, you could lend interest. My sashich. What does it mean sashich? Lav tishech. Doesn't it mean that you're permitted to take from him neshech, that you're allowed to take a bite out of the money that he has, which is lending on interest? No, it actually means tashech, meaning you could give the non-Jew. Tashech is to give him the bite, meaning you give him. You could borrow from the non-Jewish bank and pay him interest. Says the Gemara, what? That's what the pasuk is coming to teach me? Lo yisagid lav hachi? What do you mean? You think the pasuk is coming to command us that we have to give ribis to a non-Jew? And if it's coming to tell me that you're allowed to, obviously, why would you think that it's forbidden? So what is this la nachri tashich? You're telling me no, you cannot lend on interest. You could borrow an interest from a non-Jew. But why do I need the pasuk to tell me that? Says, I don't need it for it itself. I just need lafuke achicha deloy. I needed the pasuk to say the inference that you're allowed to pay interest to a non-Jew, but you're not allowed to pay interest to a Jew. Says, what? For your brother, another Jew, the pasuk explicitly says that you're not allowed to. The borrower, actually, as we'll see later on in this parak, that not only is the lender not allowed to lend on interest, the borrower is not allowed to pay on interest. So I don't need to have a pasuk for that. Says Gemara, no, we needed you. You're right. You already have a negative prohibition. We wanted to say that you even violate a positive commandment by inferring from Lonachris Hashech, but for your brother, for another Jew, you're not allowed to. So the Gemara says, however, asks Esveh from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah clearly said, love and mehen, you're allowed to borrow from the non-Jews, umalvin oisim b'ribos, you're allowed to lend them on interest. Even by ger taishav. So it clearly contradicts and says that you're allowed to lend with interest. Some Rav Chibur Rav Huni says you're right. Biblically, you're right. Like the pasuk says, "Lanachis hashech," as our Mishnah says, you're allowed to lend non-Jews on interest. By nitzcha ella, however, but there's a limitation to it. As the Gemara continues to have Ayin Aleph and Aleph, is b'chtei chayav. Is only they permit him according to how much he needs to live. More than that is rabbinically forbidden because he might come to be drawn after the ways of the non-Jews, and therefore that is forbidden. That's one approach. Rav Nami says, no, hachol be here. Our Mishnah that says you're allowed to lend them on interest is specifically by Talmidei Chacham Askinan. It's told by Talmudic scholars. Time in my Gaz Rabban, what was the reason why the Rabban were geyser that it's prohibited to lend a non-Jew with interest? It is because then maybe the non-Jews are going to start hanging around you because you're giving them all this money that you're lending to them. Yilma Mimaisav is going to come to learn from their ways. Now, but since he's a Talmud scholar, so Yilmoid Mimaisav. So he's not going to learn from his ways, and therefore that's why it's going to be permitted. So that's the two different approaches that the Gemara brings. Now, those who actually learned this teaching of Rav Huna of lending to a non-Jew, which we just spoke about right now, there was one version that Rav Huna was talking about this, that you're allowed to lend to a non-Jew. Some learned it Ahad Tani Rav Yosef on something else. A brayso Rav Yosef was teaching in Shemais. Pasuk says, "Im kesef talves ami." If you're going to lend money to my people, as ani imach, the poor that are with you. So says Rav Yosef like this: Ami v'nachri. So the pasuk says, "Im kesef talves ami." What does it mean? My people, the Jewish people. So if Ami v'nachri, if let's say you have a Jew and a non-Jew that are coming to borrow money, it's Ami kaidim. So Hashem is telling you, my people are first. Ani v'asher, if you have a pauper and a wealthy person, Ani kaidim, the poor person comes first, like it says, as Ani imach. Which now, however, let's say you have aniyecha, let's say you have your poor people. What does it mean, your poor people? Your relatives from your family. Vani ircha, and you have the poor of your city. Aniyecha kaidim. Your relatives come first, like it says, imach, the ones that are close with you. So we learned out from the word ami, we learned out from the word ani, we learned from imach. Now, what happens if you have aniya ircha, vaniya iracheres? Let's say you have the poor of your community and you have the poor of another community. Aniya ircha kaidman, the poor of your city come first, like Rashi explains. They're more imach than the other aniyim. So the Gemara explains the Amamar, the master, the town of the Brisa said, Ami v'nachri, when you have my people and a non-Jew, Ami kaidim. My people are first. So Gemara Pshita, obviously, we understand the responsibility to another Jew before a non-Jew. Rav Nachman, this is the teaching that we said, the first version, and now it's on this teaching, the Amali Huna, he says, no, we needed this to tell you that even if you're lending a non-Jew with interest, you're making money, and a Jew, you're not making money, you cannot let in with interest, you're doing it for free. Even so, that's what we're saying, that you would still be required to lend to the Jew before the non-Jew. Tanya learn the Brisa. Amr B'Yisi continues some Agadic teachings on this. He says, come and see Samoyos Einehem Shal Malve B'Ribos, the blinding of the eyes of those who lend with interest, meaning Mevet Fablinded, meaning sometimes you see things clearly, and sometimes how could people be so blind, like they say, to do certain things? And you find that by those who lend money on interest, because Adam Karlachavei Rasha, you have a guy, he calls his friend a wicked person. Yerdi Meilechayev. So generally he's going to get into a fight with him, as if he hit him, as if he's coming to kill him, and he's going to go into to protect himself. Which Rashi brings a whole different interpretation, that he's allowed to destroy the other guy's parnasa. Which Rashi says, I find this difficult. Chacham would permit a Jew to take revenge and to do bad to somebody. The Gemara says in Ksubis that a similar terminology, and it wouldn't make sense over there to say that over there. So So rather, Yerim Elechayev just means to say that, he's going to fight with him, and because he's going to try to defend himself. So even if a guy just calls you a Rasha, you called me a Rasha, now Behaim, these people, the guys who lend with interest, the same people who would fight you if you call them a Rasha, they bring the witnesses, they bring the scribe, and they bring the kulmus, they bring the quill, and they bring the ink, like they're setting up the stage for their own prosecution. But they write it and they sign it. This Jew denies the God of the Jewish people. I mean, he's having them sign that he's such a person because he's lending a Jew with ribbis. Tanya Linda Braisa, Shimon Lazaimi says, whoever has money, and he lends it without charging interest. The pasuk says in Tehillim, his money he doesn't give with neshech, with biting, with interest. And bribery on a poor person he doesn't take. Whoever does this, will never falter. Now, the inference of this is that those who do this will not falter. You learn, whoever lends money and interest, his assets become depleted. But we see people who don't lend money and interest become mismaitin, and they lose. They also lose. Their money gets depleted. Remember, Lazi says there's a difference. Halal mismaitin. You're right. You could have people who lend without interest and they lose their money, but they come out of it. Halal mismaitin, but you have the people who lend with interest that they lose it and they don't come out of it, and that's what the pasuk means to say. La'ilam could be read in two different ways. That those who do this will never falter. In other words, if they falter, that faltering will not be forever. But those who give with ribbis, their yimot will be la'ilam. Mar quotes a pasuk in Chavakuk, Lama sabit boigdim. Why do the traders look tachrish, that quiet, or look at the traders and you're quiet? And Bevala is the girsa Rosh Tzadik Mimeni, when he swallows, when the wicked swallows those who are more righteous than him. So it's like basically asking, why do you look, Hashem, and you see such things and you don't say anything? But from the words of the pasuk, when he says that he swallows, the wicked swallows someone that's Tzadik Mimenu, so Ravuni says yes, Tzadik Mimenu, but the wicked could swallow someone who's more righteous than him. Tzadik Gomer in the Beleya, but a totally righteous person that the wicked cannot swallow. And that's what Rashi explains. What it means to say is, in our context, that even if he's mismited, even if he falters, he'll come out and he will not be swallowed forever. Thank you to any time.